Hey, how's it going? I'm standing at this intersection in Long Beach, California because a little over 100 years ago, this is where Hollywood began. Join me, won't you, as I check out the brief and mostly unspectacular history of Balboa Studios. Between 1913 and 1918, all four corners of 6th and Alamitos were home to Balboa, the first movie studio west of Chicago. During those years, the company made over 1,000 films and was the city's largest employer. Balboa was owned and operated by Herbert and Elwood Horkheimer, but they didn't build the place. The California Motion Picture Manufacturing Company did that in 1910. The place was small potatoes until the Horkheimers came on the scene. They purchased the studio in 1913 using a $7,000 inheritance, and for the next 5 years they'd be the biggest movie producers in the United States. Balboa was eventually home to such stars as Fatty Arbuckle and Buster Keaton, but it got off to a rocky start. In April of 1913, Herbert and Elwood signed a contract with author Jack London to adapt his novels into films. Accounts are hazy, but apparently they drug their heels past the agreed-upon dates and London signed with another producer. Legal entanglements ensued and the author not only won the case, but Congress decided to strengthen copyright law in favor of artists. A victory for London and other authors who followed him, but a blow for the Horkheimers. Still, our boys were resilient and hard-working. They owned 8 acres at the main site, the aforementioned intersection, and 11 acres in nearby Signal Hill, which they used for westerns and other outdoor adventure films. At the height of its powers, Balboa produced not only features and shorts, but also serials. In fact, Herbert and Elwood made Paramount Pictures' first ever serial. When the plant was working full bore, some 3 to 4% of the world's motion picture output came from Long Beach. That's a significant number. By 1914, the Horkheimers had their own on-site film processing lab, the largest west of Chicago. The studio ran 3 shifts a day and had productions running from as many as 10 independent producers at a time. One of those alliances was with William Fox, creator of Fox Films and the largest distributor in the Americas. And yes, when I say Fox, I mean Fox as in 20th century. Not to mention everyone's favorite completely nonpartisan news network. That same year, American independent producers led by Herbert and Fox challenged Thomas Edison's monopoly on movie making. By 1915, the California studio heads won in the courts and were no longer required to pay Edison royalties for his filmmaking technology. This was a huge step in cementing the movie business on the West Coast. 1914 continued to be a banner year when one of Balboa's cameramen pioneered a film stock capable of shooting at night. Movies with the first nighttime photography made it into theaters by 1915. Also in 14, Horkheimer staff created a technique for colorizing black and white film. Herbert and Elwood were now on a roll. In 1915, Balboa wooed Henry Walthall away from the East Coast. Walthall was one of the stars of the racially dubious blockbuster Birth of a Nation. He made 2 pictures in Long Beach that year and was paid $1,000 a week, roughly the average income in America at that time. By September of 15, all 4 corners of 6th and Alameda Streets were utilized by the Balboa Amusement Producing Company. There are 8 buildings with 8,000 square feet of stage capacity. They also had a steel reservoir for cooling the water used to develop the film. All the buildings were painted a charming green and white. When Balboa started in 13, its total workforce numbered 25. In just 2 years, that number increased by 1,000%, and the plant was turning out 15,000 feet of negative a week. But not everything was puppy dogs and rainbows. In December of 1915, a Balboa cameraman was arrested as a military spy. The fellow bore the nickname the Baron because of his impressive mustache, Danish ancestry, and military comportment. In 1916, Balboa Studios released Little Mary Sunshine, widely considered to be the first family film. The movie was a hit, spawning not only sequels, but a whole new genre. In 1917, the Horkheimers built the world's largest glassed-in studio to entice Fatty Arbuckle to leave New Jersey and produce movies in Hollywood by the Sea. Arbuckle brought his Comique Film Corporation to Balboa, along with Buster Keaton and Al St. John. He produced a total of 6 movies in Long Beach. Unlike most studios from this period, Balboa avoided distribution. While the other companies owned their own chains of theaters, the Horkheimers kept out of that aspect of the business. This reluctance would come back to bite Herbert and Elwood in the ass. In 1918, Charlie Chaplin made 3 visits to Long Beach to study his friend Roscoe Arbuckle's production methods and infrastructure. Chaplin used what he learned to construct his own studio in Los Angeles. We'll discuss that facility in greater depth in another episode. 1918 began as a promising year for Balboa, but the writing was on the wall by year's end. World War I resulted in a celluloid shortage. The same chemicals that were used in motion picture film were also used in many military-grade explosives. The war also served to alienate the Horkheimers from the distribution channels in Europe. Couple these factors with a particularly nasty outbreak of influenza, and suddenly you've got a movie studio in trouble. The discovery of crude oil in Long Beach and Signal Hill was the last nail in the coffin. Long Beach, the former Hollywood by the Sea, is destined for the petroleum trade. Los Angeles, about 25 miles to the north, became the movie's ultimate home. Herbert and Elwood Horkheimer assigned Balboa Studios to the Los Angeles Wholesalers Board of Trade for liquidation. The same month, Roscoe, Fatty Arbuckle, abandoned the facility for greener pastures in Glendale, California. Of course, Arbuckle was just a couple of years away from career-ending problems of his own. In 1925, the heavyset star's famous glass-walled soundstage was finally demolished. Balboa's store of some 100,000 props was sold off, and many of those items remained in use at other studios for decades after. There you have it. A combination of bad luck and economic short-sightedness prevented Long Beach from becoming the true center of movie production in the world. Had it not been for those factors, along with a world war and a flu pandemic, Hollywood might have been 25 miles to the south. Also, the name Horkheimer might have been more than a silly-sounding footnote. That's all I have for you today. If you like this kind of thing, hit like, or better yet, subscribe. See you next time.